All right, hi everybody. Thanks to everyone who's joining live, and I appreciate everyone who's registered from the Care Oncology Network. My name is Dr. Vanessa Ingram, and I'm really passionate doing these educational events. Today we're going to be talking about just an empowered approach. It's obviously in North America, we have Pink October, which is focused around breast cancer awareness. But in my opinion, in practice for about 15 years, there's really not enough being spoken about actual prevention. I think we're all quite aware that breast cancer is a big issue in our society. So let's jump right in with our slides. And so what we're going to do today, I'm going to tr it's a lot of slides and a lot of information. So it's going to be a bit of a kind of like a fire hose coming towards you, but I will be sending out the slides as a PDF that have resources. They have the links to the relevant research, so you can explore those afterwards. So let's get started here. Okay, just start my timer so I stay on track. All right, so today, obviously, this talk is focused around, evidence-based strategies for reducing our risk of breast cancer. But what we got to keep in mind as we go through this presentation is that by adopting some of these risk reduction strategies, we're not only preventing or reducing our risk of breast cancer specifically, but pretty much all chronic disease because chronic things like breast cancer, these are multifactorial and things that affect cancer risk will also affect things like diabetes and other chronic diseases. This is also pretty relevant for anyone who's already been diagnosed or undergoing cancer treatment. All of these things are helpful, evidence-based, and very low risk. So let's get started. So, Pink October, like I said, I think the problem in our society right now is we're too focused on this idea of awareness. And unfortunately, with a lot of this, the Pink Ribbon campaign, awareness is often focused around fundraising, and that fundraising, a lot of that money is going towards drug development. We're not really we're not really speaking a lot about what we can do to prevent or to reduce our risk of chronic disease, and especially breast cancer. We often talk about screening, and I think there's some confusion about screening being prevention. Screening is very important for early diagnosis, and we know that if we can catch something early, we have a better chance of having a positive outcome. But screening isn't necessarily prevention. We also have a very good idea about risk factors and things that will influence our risk, but these often are not discussed in the clinical setting and in public education. Another point is that there's this misconception that there's a that breast cancer is a genetic condition. And yes, while we do see it in families, and there are genes associated with hereditary breast cancer, the main one being obviously the BRCA gene, um, research shows that only about 5 to 10% of breast cancer cases are purely or related to this gene or this family of genes. So what that really means is that our environment, our lifestyle makes a huge impact, and that probably up to 95% of breast cancer cases are based on lifestyle, environment, or what we call epigenetic factors. So things that can actually change the expression of genes. So why me? Why am I talking about this? Well, contrary to what it might look like, I'm actually a native Bahamian. I'm from the Bahamas. And I grew up in the Bahamas, and growing up in the Bahamas, I was saw a lot of breast cancer just in family or in friends and family of friends, and it was quite prevalent in our society. And research has actually showed that we have a very large percentage of this BRCA1, this genetic hereditary form of breast cancer in the Bahamas. But we have to kind of contextualize this because what the BRCA genes are, these are basically repair genes. So when we have mutations in these genes, if our environment causes a damage to our genetic code, then we're not able to repair those. So people with the BRCA mutation need to be even more careful about their environment. And in the Bahamas, we have a lot of environmental risk factors, and we're going to talk about all of these. So things like a very high amount of diabetes, obesity, poor diet, a lot of fried foods, high processed foods. We have a culture of a lot of alcohol use, and if you're listening from the UK, that could be similar in your society. We tend to in the Bahamas, we drink water out of bottles. We don't have a very good source of groundwater. And these bottles are plastic. They sit in the sun, and there's a link between certain chemicals that come from plastics and disrupting hormones and potentially being risk to breast cancer or linked to breast cancer. We also have a problem with how we dispose of garbage. We do a lot of burning of our trash. The landfill tends to be set on fire, and a lot of chemicals are in the environment. So this really, as I started practice, I did my undergraduate in biology, biochemistry, initially wanted to become a veterinarian, somehow accidentally got into medicine and became a naturopathic physician. I trained in Canada or the US first and then Canada, came back to the Bahamas. And right away, as I started to practice at my father's clinic, he's also a integrative and holistic medical doctor who who has been in practice for over 30 years. We had coming through the door so many clients with breast cancer or concerned about breast cancer because it was in their family. So right away, this really led me to focus and kind of create a bit of a niche specialty, looking at how we can not only reduce our breast cancer risk, but also improve outcomes by looking at kind of the whole person, looking at our environment, and help those that have already been diagnosed. So early on in my career, I studied with one of the world experts in breast cancer, Dr. Sataram Kaur. Did a lot of training with her. Here's her amazing book. I've added this to the resources at the end. Everything that we're talking about, if you want kind of the big picture, you can find information in this book. So let's go through this. And so when I work with clients, I'm not just looking at their diagnosis. I'm not just looking at their medical history. When I treat clients, I'm really passionate about this idea of an empowered approach. I really want to teach people how they can help themselves, how they can improve their lifestyle, their environment to have the best health outcomes. When I work with clients with any type of cancer challenge, especially with breast cancer, we're looking at things like circadian biology, nutrition, the environment, and that's going to be our focus today. But it goes a little bit deeper, and I actually have a breast cancer coaching course coming up. So if you're interested in that, you can send me an email and express your interest. I can tell you more about that. But in this 3-month coaching program, we're going to look even deeper into things like our biological terrain, the role of our mitochondria. These are our cell engines that provide the energy to the cell that also control our gene expression. We're looking at obviously stress and hormone balance, immune function. So let's kick it off with probably my favorite topic here. So in 2017, the Nobel Prize in Medicine was given to a group of researchers who were looking at something called the circadian mechanism. So, circadian biology has to do with the 24-hour light and dark cycles. And essentially, we've evolved on a planet that for 4 billion years, this 24-hour light dark cycle was a precondition to surviving on this planet. So, everything alive today had to adapt to this 24-hour light and dark cycle. It had to basically schedule every part of their physiology to expect light in the morning, dark at night. So it's really important. So since 2017, there's been an incredible amount of research on how circadian biology, the body's timing mechanism, when it does things, what it does in the morning versus night, how exposure to light in the morning versus light at night, how this is all controls basically everything and controls gene expression, controls things like digestion, detoxification, our immune system function, obviously our sleep-wake cycles, our hormone secretion. This is all under this 24-hour light and dark timing mechanism that we call circadian biology. So about 10 or 15 years ago, there was also something called the Nurses' Health Study. Oh, sorry, the paper came out. And this paper basically started to show that nurses who work night shift had an an increased risk of many chronic diseases. Amongst them was breast cancer, also diabetes, insulin resistance, and different cardiovascular disease. So that kind of led to more research in this area. And then essentially what we found is not just those conditions were linked to this idea of imbalanced circadian biology. So light at the wrong times, working shifts, being awake at night when we should be asleep. But basically, this is controlling every part of our physiology. So when this gets messed up, pretty much we're at increased risk of all chronic disease, but especially breast cancer. And we're going to explain that, how that works now. So again, this is just showing us again. So we got to keep in mind the body has a lot of things it's got to do in the 24-hour light and dark cycle. Every cell has thousands of different functions it must perform. And so everything is very tightly regulated. And there is a genetic expression of this 24-hour light and dark cycle, or this circadian biology, but it's influenced by external forces, and the main one being our light environment. So when we have things like not insufficient light during the day and too much light at night, we have this kind of situation of cellular chaos. I like to make make the analogy of like Amazon or a really big company. There's so much that has to go on for this company, for this, for them to be successful. Employees got to arrive on time, the shipments got to go out on time, deliveries have to come in at a certain time. And when this mechanism breaks down, when timing breaks down, we have chaos. And this is what happens in the body. There's cellular chaos. The body doesn't know what to do when. The immune system doesn't know when to upregulate or downregulate. We have things like stress hormone, cortisol at the wrong time, and our nighttime hormone, melatonin, being secreted or being suppressed at the incorrect time. And so when we have this idea of cellular chaos or circadian dysfunction, this is when our timing mechanisms are confused. And as we mentioned, the primary driver of the circadian dysfunction is insufficient light during the day when our brain, our body, for 4 billion years of evolution have expected to have light, and then not having enough light, and then having light at night when, again, for millions of years, we've expected it to be dark. When this gets messed up, when we have that wrong timing, every organ is affected. We have a central timekeeper or a central clock in our brain, and that's going to keep time. And then we have our peripheral clock. So every organ has its own kind of schedule or its own clock, which tells it which functions to perform and when. So when we confuse that with that light at the wrong time, we see many different across the board dysfunction in organs. Things like, altered insulin sensitivity, diabetes. In fact, it's really interesting. If you have the same meal at 8 o'clock in the morning versus 8 o'clock at night, you will have a very different blood sugar response. We're also finding in things like cancer treatment, if we give chemotherapy to the same patient at a different time, this can affect the outcome and the response because the body is expecting to do certain things at certain times based on the light environment. So just so you know, I'm not making this stuff up. These are just 3 slides. I'm just going to go through them really quickly. These are all the conditions so far. So just in the last probably, we'll say 10 to 15 years, that have been strongly linked to this idea of circadian disruption, this imbalanced timing. And we have cancer, again, cardiovascular disease, a lot around obesity and weight gain. Light profoundly affects, again, glucose handling. So if we don't get that light in the morning, we actually find that people eating the same diets, they'll be fatter than those that get morning light exposure. And the same thing is light at night. Those that sleep with, too much light in the bedroom or have equivalent to a street light coming in their window, it's not dark enough, they're known to have a highly increased risk of diabetes, as well as higher blood pressure in the morning and higher glucose. Same thing with the immune system. So our immune system has different functions throughout the day. Typically, overnight, we have increased immune system surveillance and function. And if it's not dark enough, if we don't get the right signal that now it's nighttime, our immune system overnight won't work as well, especially in regards to early cancer cell surveillance, especially in regards to things like kind of removing virally infected cells. We also find that if we have poor circadian rhythm, vaccines don't work as well. Again, cancer treatment sometimes doesn't work as well. So I know I focus a lot about this when I talk to clients, but it really is so important. No matter what you're going to do, it's going to work better if you get your circadian biology, that light dark cycle correct. More. So again, not just chronic disease, also influence of, viral infections. And this is just showing us that if we don't get darkness at night, if we don't get the nighttime hormone melatonin increased or coming out at night, then our natural killer cells, really important part of our immune system, don't function as well. And so that leads me to kind of ask myself, as a naturopathic doctor, as integrative physician, I'm always asking, what is the root cause of chronic disease? And, back in, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said, oh, it's, poor diet or it's, nutrient deficiencies. But this is even more fundamental than that. When we have this imbalanced circadian rhythm, we don't even absorb our nutrients as well. No matter if we have the best diet in the world, it's not going to be as beneficial to us because our gut isn't working as well. Our metabolism isn't working as well. So the first thing I like to focus on is getting the circadian balance correct. And if we look at this was a recent study looking at people in the US, and this is quite shocking. So it really showed that, or it showed that 85 to 90% of the time, people are indoors. And living an indoor existence is probably one of the root causes of chronic disease because we've evolved outside under natural light, and now we're inside under insufficient light during the day. Even if we have all the lights on in the room in a bright office, the light outside on a cloudy day is still orders of magnitude brighter. So we really need to move from living inside, getting outside more, and being very mindful about technology use and light at night because this is really confusing our body's nighttime functions. So let's talk a little bit about sunlight. So sunlight, it's easy to think that sunlight is just one thing, but I like to talk about sunlight or the solar spectrum as information. And our brains, our bodies are so exquisitely finely tuned to this changing information that's offered by the light environment outside. There's three components to sunlight. One is visible light that obviously lets us see. There's infrared light. I always call it the light you cannot see. It's often perceived as heat or warmth. And then we have UV light, which obviously is associated UVB with making vitamin D. UVA on the skin also helps to regulate blood pressure, has a balancing effect on something called our T regulatory cells, so it can help with autoimmunity. So it's important to expose ourselves to sunlight throughout the day because the information is always changing. And our brains are very attuned to these changes. And so our circadian rhythm is going to be set by seeing the different types of information present in sunlight during different times of the day. When we're inside, we're basically under steady state lighting, and it's often not bright enough during the day to really strongly create this strong circadian rhythm. When we're inside behind glass, especially energy efficient glass, which is probably 90% of all the glass today, if you're in the UK and you're living in an older building, you might still have quartz glass, it allows more of the solar spectrum through. But the problem with being inside and glass, it really only lets that visible spectrum of light in. You're blocking the infrared and the UV, and we can talk about why that's important. Interesting as well is we often like to think that most of our chronic diseases, and we're talking about mainly diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, they started when processed food became available. We started eating, processed food diets. But if we look epidemiologically kind of at some of these trends, what we see is at the turn of the century, when people moved inside, working in factories versus on farms, and started being exposed to the steady state, stim light all day of just one type of information, just that visible light, that's when we really see all chronic disease. And as we move from incandescent bulbs, which are unfortunately being phased out, to LED bulbs, this problem has got worse and worse. Then I just want to have a quick little mention of this idea of infrared light. And we have near infrared light and far infrared light. And so we know that, or we're very aware in right, basically in medicine, that a lot of our risk of chronic disease comes down to how well our cells can produce energy. And this comes down to the function of our little cellular engines or cellular batteries, sometimes we can call them, and they're called the mitochondria. And when our mitochondria work well, everything works well. When there's enough energy currency available in the cell, the body works well. And one of the biggest factors for our mitochondria is exposure to this type of near infrared light. The light, we basically can't see it, but it's present. About 50% of the solar spectrum is this invisible near infrared light. And when we're exposed to this, our mitochondria make something called melatonin. And we're going to talk more about melatonin in, I think, it's the next slide. But we have two types of melatonin. So the first type of melatonin is produced by the brain and the pineal gland. This type of melatonin is made when it's bright outside in the morning, and it's released when that light goes away. And that's one of the ways we strengthen and control that circadian rhythm in terms of upregulating immunity at night, upregulating digestion in the morning. Um, so that's important for our circadian rhythm. But our mitochondria, on exposure to near infrared light all day long, they make their own little packets of melatonin within in the cell. And this is so, so important because it acts like a coolant for the engine. It keeps the engines running well. So when people ask me about what nutrients can they take to improve their mitochondrial function, the first thing I say is go outside. This is also why red light therapy has been shown to be so beneficial for so many things. Red lights or near infrared light therapy, these also provide that support to our mitochondrial function. So let's talk about what we can do and how I kind of structure this to help my clients. So the most important time to see some natural light is first thing in the morning. So no matter what else you're going to do, if you ignore everything else in this presentation, I would love everyone to just get up in the morning, go outside, have a tea or coffee outside, go for a walk. This is one of the most powerful, simple ways you can reduce your risk of pretty much all chronic disease. Getting that morning light will anchor that circadian rhythm. You'll start to make melatonin, which is going to be released when the light goes away. It's also, when we're exposed to light in the morning, we increase our stress hormone cortisol. Often we think cortisol is a bad thing. Cortisol is often called stress hormone, but I like to refer to it as the body's kind of get going hormone. We want it high in the morning. In terms of autoimmunity, a cortisol peak a spike of cortisol in the morning will actually help to downregulate too much inflammation. It'll help get rid of any cells that potentially could become self-interested or autoimmune kind of cells. It also helps with our insulin sensitivity, our focus, our mood. We start to make our neurotransmitters first thing in the morning. So if nothing else, get outside 10 to 15 minutes, at least 30, 40 minutes longer, the better. Outside, no sunglasses. To further strengthen this circadian mechanism, you want to be, actually, this is kind of the way I like to structure this. Back in the day, when everyone still smoked, we used to have smoke breaks in offices. So I like people to kind of think about this as having sun breaks. The more you can pop outside just for 5, 10 minutes throughout the day, the more you're going to be reminding your body what time it is, the more you're going to be strengthening that natural function of your circadian rhythm. So getting outside throughout the day, really, really important to kind of sync all those clocks and all the organs that want to be reminded what time it is. And when you're inside, same light environment, you're not getting that changing light. Obviously, you're going to make vitamin D if you go outside, expose some skin to the sun. It's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk, but there's a lot of benefits of making your own vitamin D above the benefits of taking it. Um, and then as the day goes on, so we want brightness in the morning, darkness at night. As we get towards sunset, the UV is going to go away. The infrared is still going to stay there. And that's why, if we look at the sunset or the sunrise, it's kind of can be kind of pink or reddish. There's a lot of infrared. There's not a lot of UV. There's really no risk to, if you're worried about skin cancer, about these earlier late sun exposure times. If we go outside towards the end of the day, again, we're syncing that circadian rhythm. And very interestingly, if we see late day light, so sunset, this can actually protect us against the negative effects of then having bright light at night. So it's a bit of a like a little vaccine for light at night if you see the sunset. We didn't talk yet about food timing, but we also want to try to eat all of our food when the sun's out. Our insulin sensitivity, the way our body will metabolize food, is far improved during the day. So if we eat after dark, if we eat after sunset, we're going to have higher glucose spikes. Our body's not going to use that. It's going to store it as fat. Um, when we increase glucose and insulin and IGF-1, that's strongly linked to breast cancer and most cancers. Then at night, so we need brightness during the day, darkness at night is incredibly important. So, from worst lights to the best lights at night, we don't want to have any bright overhead lights, especially LED lights, because if we think about it, we've evolved to experience light coming down this way. So we're most sensitive to light from above. So after dark, what you can do, try to not have any lights on above, try to use downlights, lamps, because if we interfere with this melatonin because it's too bright at night, this is going to increase our cancer risk and increase our risk of all chronic disease. At night, you really need a dark bedroom. So, using blackout blinds, an eye mask, whatever you can do to make your bedroom like a little sleep cave is so important. And also, just the dimmer you can keep your lights at night, the better. Ideally, try not to use screens at night. And I'm actually quite happy I don't see any of our UK clients on the call today because it is 11:30. So try not to use screens. Keep the lights as low as possible. Obviously, be careful. We don't want you to fall or get hurt. So we talked about a little bit about the importance of darkness, but let's go a little bit deeper because melatonin, sometimes we think it's just, oh, it just helps us sleep, but it's so much more than that. It's important for circadian rhythm, but it actually regulates the release of other hormones. It's profoundly neuroprotective. It protects the brain at night. It lets our brain's immune system kind of clear misfolded proteins and reduces our risk of Alzheimer's and dementia. Melatonin also opposes estrogen. So this is probably one of the most important links to breast cancer. If we have too much light at night, and this is what we see in epidemiological research, we have a higher risk of breast cancer. It's probably because melatonin opposes estrogen, so it keeps estrogen down. So if we don't have melatonin at night, we have high estrogen during the whole 24-hour cycle. Probably also why girls in cities exposed to a lot of light at night. Um, everyone's going through puberty earlier. They're having earlier and earlier periods. So this is just a summary. If you want the science, you can read through that. So let's change focus a bit on nutrition because I realize I'm running on a bit. So what do we know? So in terms of the biggest, I'll call them levers for reducing breast cancer risk, a lot of us don't think about alcohol, but alcohol in the research seems to be a really big deal. Obviously, ultra-processed foods, quite problematic. When we're eating industrial seed oils, these are causing inflammation in the body. When we have chronic inflammation, that's setting the stage for metabolic dysfunction, for cancer, for damaging our cellular engines. Our mitochondria do not like low-grade chronic inflammation. There's quite a bit of research looking at this idea of processed meats, and when we're talking about charred meats, I'm talking about like when you like super barbecue things and it's blackened, all of those that charred stuff tends to be a lot of those chemicals are carcinogenic. They have to be detoxified by the body. Same thing with processed meats. They're quite linked to colon cancer as well. Big one here is this idea of insulin control. So if we have chronically high insulin because of our diet or because of our light environment, this is going to increase basically the growth of cells. Insulin is it's a get bigger, keep growing signal. And insulin, when insulin is high, this can increase something called IGF-1, again, strongly linked to cancer. When insulin is high too long, estrogen tends to follow it. We see a lot of estrogen dominant, so estrogen imbalances in women who have poor metabolic insulin control and are overweight. And of course, diabetes is a huge risk factor for a lot of cancers, especially breast cancer. So just a little bit more on alcohol. And again, I'm from the Bahamas. We do like to have a drink sometimes, but I think it's important just to be aware of this. Alcohol tends to also increase estrogen. The acetaldehyde, which is a breakdown product of alcohol, directly can damage DNA. Of course, if we're drinking, most people would be drinking in the evening. Alcohol is terrible for sleep. It suppresses REM sleep. It disrupts the normal sleep cycles as well as melatonin, so we don't get that strong repair function overnight. And if we look at the research, it's pretty interesting because they've kind of shown that even moderate drinking, so kind of one drink per day, can increase breast cancer risk by up to 10%, which is kind of interesting because there's also other research saying that, oh, it's good to drink at least a glass a day, but that might be the case for stress, but maybe not for breast cancer risk. But that being said, let's be honest. Um, a lot of people still are going to have alcohol, and it's not the point isn't to avoid it completely. It's to understand that it could be a factor. If you're high risk, if you have a BRCA mutation, that might be a case where you do want to avoid it. But there are some things we can do to mitigate harm. Um, I'll leave these here that you can read. I don't want to encourage drinking either, or say that you can get away with it. But but I just leave this in there because I know people are still going to drink. I don't want you to think I'm no fun. So here's before we drink, we can take certain things, try to have it on with a meal. I'm a big fan. This sounds terrible. If people are going to drink during the day, have your alcohol with lunch. Stop drinking a few hours before bed, and that in and of itself, it's going to protect your circadian rhythm and your body's ability to repair and detoxify overnight. So let's talk then again about dietary strategies. And of course, the big one that you'll hear a lot about is this idea of the Mediterranean diet. And this is a diet filled with healthy fats, a lot of seafood, legumes, some complex carbs, nuts, seeds, a lot of seasonal fruits and vegetables, herbs, things like that. But overall, what we're looking for is some kind of eating strategy that's going to be anti-inflammatory. It's going to support your gut microbiome. And we know that when we have a healthy gut, we have a healthy immune system. When we have a healthy immune system, our risk of all chronic disease, especially things like breast cancer, decreases. So we want to be eating lots of fresh fruits and veggies. Obviously, low glycemic diets, we talked about insulin, estrogen, IGF-1, and the link between breast cancer. So what that means is you got to avoid the processed food, not too many carbohydrates. If you're going to have dessert, have it with a meal to blunt that blood sugar response. Sufficient protein is really important. I'm a big fan of people consuming fermented foods for their gut microbiome, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, those sorts of things. Then there's this idea of time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting, and a lot of people have heard of intermittent fasting. You can get so much more bang for your buck out of your intermittent fasting if you do it in a way that syncs with your circadian rhythm. What do I mean by that? Bright light, food, no light, stop eating. So I'm much, especially with my, clients with a high risk of cancer or who already have been diagnosed, having their meals, don't have breakfast at 12 and eat until 9. What you want to do is have um, an early breakfast and stop eating earlier. You're going to sleep better. You're going to preserve that melatonin secretion at night. The other thing is if it's dark and your melatonin has already begun to rise, your insulin control is actually worse. So this also plays into, the risk of metabolic syndrome and then cancer. This is just some studies talking about the Mediterranean diet. Um, this paper decided or came to the conclusion that diet was probably the most important modifiable, so meaning something we can control risk factor for cancer prevention. And I like this little diagram. It's super simple. I kind of agree with this. Most of your plate should be your um, non-starchy fruits and vegetables, eating a rainbow, a little bit of protein, and have some healthy fats. And what we mean by that are things like olive oil, natural fats, so not processed seed oils. There's a lot of marketing um, misinformation around the role of processed seed oils like canola oil, corn oil, margarine, things like that. I But the research clearly says that if we stick to our natural fats, olive oil, avocado oil, coconut oil, maybe butter, lard, tallow, we're going to be much better off in terms of inflammation and risk of chronic disease. And then another another big kind of part of this story is this idea of we should really be eating what's local and seasonal. So just like our body is responding to the light environment throughout the day, there's also a circadian rhythm. So this is the rhythm throughout the season. So there's going to be more sun in the summer, less sun in the winter. And the plants are responding to this as well. This is why seasonally you're going to see things like sweeter fruits, more vegetables in the summer versus the winter. And when we eat this way in sync with the seasons and eating local and seasonal food, we're giving the body what it's expecting. Just like how in the morning we expect light, in the summer we expect fruit. If we're in an area that can produce that based on the light environment for the food. So when we eat in this seasonal and local way, we're supporting our glycemic and our insulin control. So when people ask me, what should I eat? I say, where do you live? What season is it? And this should really drive your kind of personalized dietary strategy to prevent all chronic disease, and especially breast cancer, because there is such a link with this glycemic index and insulin levels. We talked a little earlier, we talked about near-infrared light. So near-infrared light, because it increases our mitochondrial function, it lowers blood sugar. So if we can get exposure to, and this was a study done by Glenn Jeffries, he's from the UK, Royal College of London, for everyone from the UK, and he clearly showed that if when he exposed, or he was using an indoor red light, infrared light, but exposing people to a certain wavelength of red light, basically, and then feeding them a meal, doing a glucose tolerance test, if they had the red light first, they cleared that glucose better. So their mitochondria work better. So if we can eat our food outside, if we can go for a walk after meals, this is going to help our blood sugar response no matter what we eat. Everyone is going to respond differently to things like carbohydrates, to things like saturated fats. I tell people, test, don't guess. I encourage people to try a continuous glucose monitor. This is a stick-on device that samples your glucose level under your skin. You wear that for 2 weeks and you try different meals. And you try things like eating outside versus inside, eating in the morning versus eating at night. And based on that, you can get a really clear idea about, for you, what the best diet is to control your insulin. Obviously, HbA1c, average blood sugar, and fasting insulin are really important. This is just so this whole idea about seasonal and local food. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. It's probably beyond the scope of this talk. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have a whole hour-long video describing the mechanisms behind this called Food as a Story of Light. So if you want to really understand that, watch that video. But again, basically what this is showing us is we have circadian rhythms. We also have circannual rhythms. Our ability to tolerate carbohydrates and sugar will be different in the winter than in the summer. It'll be different if it's really sunny versus dark because of the time of year. And so by eating seasonally, we're only eating the foods that our body would be expecting evolutionarily, and this is really important. These are some cool studies on this topic, basically showing that eating the same sweet cherries, also locally versus non-locally, made a big difference. So if you're eating a banana in, I don't know, in England in December This is going to be a huge mismatch to what your body expects. The way your body metabolizes and responds to that from an insulin point of view, from a gut microbiome point of view, is going to be totally different than someone in Costa Rica eating that same banana. So that's why this is so important. Let's talk about specific foods, and this is my absolute favorite. So, one of the most protective foods for a risk of breast cancer and many other cancers is our brassica family veggies. So, this is broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, watercress is a favorite. And essentially, so when we consume these foods, when we chew them up, when the cells are crushed and the 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 precursors and the enzymes in the cells mix together, we form a compound called sulforaphane. And this is a really cool compound because we call it a nutrigenomic modulator. Big fancy word that basically means it's not just like taking vitamin C. What it does is it goes into the cell, it talks to the nuclear genome, it talks to your genes, and it tells the genes to turn on genes that improve detoxification. So there's been a lot of research showing that consuming brassica veggies helps us detoxify better. So especially with there was a big study on smokers, people that ate brassica veggies with the sulforaphane, they were able to reduce their risk of lung cancer to almost the level of non-smokers because that sulforaphane detoxified or kicked out of their body all the benzene from the and acrylamides and chemicals from the smoke. Um, the sulforaphane also talks to the genome or talks to the genes and says, turn off inflammation genes. So by this genetic mechanism, it's not like taking like an aspirin. We're actually turning off inflammatory genes. We're also turning on antioxidant genes. So you could take something like glutathione, that's great. You can take vitamin C, but when you eat your brassica family veggies, you're turning on your body's ability to make exponentially more powerful antioxidants like superoxide dismutase and catalase. So very cool stuff from very humble veggies. It also powerfully influences gut function, increases gut diversity, stops inflammation at the gut level. Our gut microbiome really likes this sulforaphane. This is probably after turmeric, one of the most well-researched plant compounds. You can I invite you to type in Google sulforaphane in any disease, you'll probably find a paper. So again, talking about the main areas, cancer is huge, cardiometabolic disease, helping with insulin sensitivity. Anything to do with inflammation is going to be improved, especially brain inflammation. And cool thing we're finding too is sulforaphane has a powerful effect on cancer stem cells, which anyone who's been diagnosed or in the cancer space will understand that are a real problem. So sulforaphane is super exciting as a risk reducer, a treatment, and a potentially way to reduce cancer stem cells. But a lot of people can't tolerate adult brassica veggies, and we have something even better. So what I do, I'm very passionate about growing broccoli or brassica microgreens. So microgreens are basically the young versions, the baby versions of our adult brassicas. So we have cabbage, broccoli, kale, mustards, radish, things like that. And because the precursors to sulforaphane are used by the plants to protect the baby plants tend to, some studies even show 100 times more of this sulforaphane. So what that means is that instead of eating, a big bowl of raw cabbage, you could eat a handful of microgreens. So I invite you to see if those are available in your area. If you're interested in learning how to grow them, there's lots online, or send me a message. Another really important specific food is our fatty fish, our EPA, DHA. A lot of people take fish oils, but getting these things in their natural form is, I think, so much better because there's so many issues with oxidation and damage to some of these fish, some of these delicate fatty acids. So when we consume fatty fish, we're basically helping to regulate our immune system. We're down-regulating inflammation. By doing that, we're improving mitochondrial function. By doing that, we're reducing our risk of chronic disease and especially breast cancer. So these are some of our top EPA DHA foods. And again, by working on that inflammatory immune axis, when we decrease our chronic inflammation, we allow our immune surveillance to be a little bit or to be stronger. And there's a clear association with fatty fish and breast cancer. And it's probably one of the reasons in countries like Japan and Asia, we see much lower risks. Another reason we the our Asian countries might have a lower risk or a lower incidence of breast cancer is they eat a lot of sea vegetables. And we used to call these seaweed, but growing up, my father convinced me that these are such an important addition to our diet. We don't want to disrespect them by calling them seaweed. So I refer to different algae species as sea vegetables. And these are things like wakame, sea moss, nori, kelp. All of these things will have different functions in the body. But one of the main ways they protect against breast cancer is they help with estrogen modulation. So iodine is a really important nutrient for breast health. When our iodine levels are low, this could increase our risk. Helps to clear estrogen from the body. And there's also some really specific compounds in some of our sea vegetables that can help with early cancer, making sure that, if we develop a very early cancer, our immune system can take care of it. Um, but probably the biggest, and also they're full of trace minerals. So trace minerals help all the enzymes in our body function well, help our hormone pathways, and support our metabolism. So, I mean, if you're not used to sea veggies, just look online. There's so many great ways to eat it. I love wakame. Kelp is easy to sprinkle on your meals. Definitely try to include those. Um, Going a little bit long here. So specific food, mushrooms as well. So often we think, mushrooms are really important for our gut microbiome. They help to upregulate certain parts of our immune system against cancer. Eating even button mushrooms or portobello mushrooms, just the regular grocery store ones, a few times a week can increase things like our natural killer cells and help protect us against development of breast cancer. And then polyphenols, this is why we want to eat the rainbow. So polyphenols are all the colorful pigments we find in food. So, the purples, the reds, even like things in dark chocolate. These are all polyphenols. And polyphenols, in a similar way to sulforaphane, they're going to turn on genes that help with reducing inflammation and producing antioxidants. Most of them don't get absorbed into the body. They act locally in the gut, improving the gut microbiome, and through that mechanism, improve immune system function, reduce risk of cancer and breast cancer specifically. Quick mention of a couple other ones. Herbs and spices, curcumin, turmeric, parsley. There's something in parsley and celery called apigenin that has been shown also to help with estrogen breast cancer risk. People always ask me about chicken. I'm not a huge fan on chicken. I think we definitely, as women, need to focus on sufficient protein. So minimal, probably zero point 0.8 to 1 gram per kilogram per day minimum. But chicken, it's not necessarily that they're adding hormones to chicken and that's related to the risk. It's that these chickens are bred to go from egg to, I don't know, full grown broiler size in about, I think it's 6 to 8 weeks. They overexpress this IGF-1 protein that is linked to, high estrogen breast cancer risk. So I would say, if you're going to do poultry, duck, wild game, or even if you get your own chickens, you want a heritage breed because you're going to be getting the genetics that overexpress that IGF-1. Soy, people ask me about soy a lot. Soy can actually be quite protective. So soy, it's not estrogenic. It's a modulator. It works to modulate the estrogen receptor. So if your estrogen is too low, it can help to kind of have an estrogenic effect. If it's too high, it can help to block the stronger estrogen binding. So there is a lot of research with soy and breast cancer. However, what we're talking about here is whole soy foods like tempeh, edamame, non-GMO. Soy tends to be drenched in a lot of agricultural chemicals, so it can be problematic. So there's definitely some nuance, but I'm not, I think there is a role of soy. So let's try to get through this in the next 5 minutes. Um, toxicants. So when we're talking about toxicants, I'm talking about the things in our environment that are known to either act as xenoestrogens, so they have a very strong estrogen-like effect. When our estrogen level is, or when we have a lot of these in the body and we're binding to estrogen receptors, we're giving cells the grow, grow, grow signal. And a lot of these things will kind of have that effect. So we need to be a bit mindful. So let's go through these now. So the first category, especially linked to breast cancer, are some of these combustion chemicals, the things in the air. These are like diesel fumes, benzene, obviously tobacco smoke. So a lot of these things, they're directly genotoxic. So what that means, especially with things like BRCA mutations, if you're not able to fix those genetic insults, that can lead you down the path to breast cancer. Again, they can be estrogenic themselves. So what can we do about this? So we need to obviously have the windows open, spend more time outside. If you live in a city, maybe thinking about getting an air filter, being mindful about occupational exposures, things like gas station work. When you can often now find low VOC paints and adhesives. This is really important because a lot of our chemicals we use for building houses are quite toxic, especially linked to breast cancer. Then we have our kind of the class of metal solvents and some or metals and solvents, cadmium, lead, and arsenic are probably the most researched. So these heavy metals can actually also act as estrogen. We call them metalloestrogens. And they can stimulate those estrogen receptors, give that growth, growth, growth signal in susceptible people that aren't able to repair their genome. This could lead to breast cancer. This is our problem in the Bahamas. This is actually a photo of the Bahamas. PCBs, dioxins. So these things come from combustions of plastic, flame retardants. A lot of these are very persistent. So they're hard to get out of the body. They accumulate. And again, they're hormone disruptors and they're directly DNA toxic. They're often stored in animal fat. So this is why we talk about fish, we want to prioritize shorter lived fish. I mean, we think about not eating marlin and shark and some of the bigger fish because of the mercury, but a better reason maybe to be avoiding some of these chemicals. Yeah, so cleaning the house, again, vacuums. And also, this is probably why we see sometimes cancer clusters around hospital incinerators are a big one. We used to use a lot of PCB plastics in our hospital IV tubing and IV bags. When we incinerate them, we put a lot of these chemicals in the air, and that's increasing people's risk. This is probably one we can control a little bit more. These are the kind of consumer endocrine disrupting chemicals, some of this bisphenols, phthalates, parabens. Again, hormone disrupting. They confuse the immune system. They can downregulate the immune system. They damage the microbiome. This is also things like microplastics. So some things here that are quite important is that we want to be filtering our water. For most of us, if you're drinking rainwater or city municipal water, you want to run that through a filter, ideally an RO. Um, we use a Berkey filter, which is a countertop gravity filter. Cookware, PFAS are chemicals coming that make that nice non-stick Teflon surface really bad or terrible for our thyroid. So toxic that if you have a pet bird in your house and you cook with those, your bird will die. So that's, I mean, not using plastic as much as possible, switching to glass containers, water in glass versus plastic. What else is important to mention? I mean, you can read this, but another one we don't think of often, or two ones, are receipts, receipt paper. So when you touch the receipt from the grocery store, some of these phthalates are in the receipt. You'll absorb them through your skin. So people that work at checkout actually have a higher risk of breast cancer. And another one too, which is kind of ironic, is all of our workout gear, our outdoor clothing, and sexy yoga pants that women wear, often without underwear. A lot of these have some of these chemicals coating to protect them from moisture and mold growth. And these will directly kind of pass through the skin, especially mucous membranes if you're wearing new yoga pants with, or some of this outdoor clothing without underwear. So you really want to be a little bit mindful when you buy cleaning products, when you buy household products, when you buy clothes, and just doing a little bit of research. I mean, there's ChatGPT. You can just ask and you can find out which companies to um, are better. Last one, I promise. Organochlorides. So, our pesticides, again, these can be xenoestrogenic. They can create oxidative stress. They impact our immune system. They can, in the case of glyphosate, they destroy our gut microbiome. So, and they're directly linked to increased risk of breast cancer. This is from the Environmental Working Group. If you're eating seasonal and local, shop at farmers markets. You can often get spray-free products there. Um, and so this is from the US, but these are the produce that are most heavily sprayed, have the highest residues of pesticides. So, at the very least, these are the ones you want to pick organic. And if you can't afford it, if you um, then you can pick these ones as non-organic because they have much fewer residues. Okay, last little summary of this. So, how are we going to protect ourselves against some of these environmental chemicals? You want to filter your air, filter your water, cook, without charring. You can, if saute things, bake things, avoid all the barbecue meat or all the barbecue kind of high heat things, low toxin cooking gear, steel ceramic. Um, natural personal cleaning products. And then anything you can do to support your body's clearance of these chemicals is going to be important. So we talked about, sulforaphane from the brassica vegetables and their ability to turn on detoxification, help your body naturally get rid of them. Super important. Support your microbiome. We often think the liver is the home of detoxification, but liver makes things, sends them to the gut. If the gut microbiome is not happy, you can recirculate and reabsorb those things that should have been excreted in the urine or sorry in the bowel movements. Anything you can do to promote sweating is very helpful. Sauna, exercise. There's a lot of research from Finland showing that 5 to 7 saunas a week can reduce people's risk of dementia, of cancer, cardiovascular disease by, I think it was 70 to 80%. It's really powerful intervention. Probably one of the reasons is just getting rid of chemicals. And the last thing I want to show you. So here are some great links. Again, you're going to get this email to you, so you can click on these yourself. The Environmental or Breast Cancer Awareness Network is really great. They talk a lot about some of these specific environmental toxins, how to avoid them. Environmental Working Group is fantastic for when you're choosing cosmetics because we went a little bit fast, but a lot of our exposure to some of those endocrine disrupting chemicals are in the fragrances, in the parabens, in the stuff we're putting on our body. And especially if after a shower, we're hot, our pores are open, we're kind of spraying ourselves with, rubbing things on us, we're going to absorb a lot of that. So Skin Deep database, you can check your lotion, your makeup, and see what chemicals linked to cancer may be in there. Um, these two pertain to circadian rhythm. My circadian app is fantastic for really understanding what we talked about earlier, understanding when you need to go outside based on the changing light. In terms of light, being able to see at night, blocked blue light is a good resource for finding, less circadian disruptive lighting, like red lights, things like that. My YouTube channel, I don't know, I really love this stuff. I have a lot of educational stuff there. And then the link to the book of, a mentor who I learned a lot from, Dr. Sataram. Highly recommend that. It's fantastic. If you want to stay in touch, here's my website. I'm pretty active on more so on LinkedIn these days, but Facebook as well. And if you're interested in the metabolic treatment, so using some relatively safe repurposed drugs combined with a holistic approach to address your cancer challenge, not just breast cancer, you can reach out to Care Oncology UK. Went way over. Thank you guys so much.